Welcome to Fix It for Josh's sake. Today we're going to work on a 1981 Yamaha XJ650, or as the street name is, the Maxim. The project we're tackling today is this fuel shutoff valve, or what most people call the petcock. The innards of this, the O-ring, there's a pump in there, all that stuff is rotting and falling apart, and it was actually just leaking gas out of here. So back here you see this little red shutoff valve that I put in to limp along until I could rebuild this. Well, today the rebuild kit came in the mail, and the part number is 18-2698V, if that helps a little bit, but it is the Yamaha rebuild kit for the petcock. It's got everything you need in there. I found this on eBay. I order most of my vintage parts for these old machines on eBay. I'm sure there's other brands, and I haven't had any terrible problems with, finding a kit that's made with the right part number to rebuild these. I've rebuilt a couple of these, so come along with me as we fix this for Josh's sake. A while back, I posted a video where I went through this carb bank, the 4 carbs in here, synced them all, set the float levels, did a nice full clean and rebuild on these. You can see that in one of my previous videos on Fix It for Josh's sake. But just as important as the carburetor is the fuel shutoff valve. There are screens in here, and there's 2 different levels of fuel heights in there, so that we have the reserve or the fuel on. And on these Yamahas, we have a prime, which just lets the fuel flow without any diaphragm in the back here getting in the way of that. But the key thing about the Maxim is that this fuel system has a diaphragm in it. It's a pump that pushes the fuel into this carburetor. And so it's really important to keep an eye on this and be sure that this is rebuilt, that all of the diaphragm material is fresh and moving easily. It's not brittle or crispy or anything like that. Now, to properly get in here and take this all apart, I'm going to pull this gas tank up and off of this bike. Well, there's a 10mm bolt here at the front of the seat. We got to get the seat off, so we're going to go around here and we're going to take our key, we're going to put it in here, and we're going to turn that, and then that lets us pull the seat up so that we can get at that bolt right there. Now that I got that bolt out, we can lift the tank up. I'm going to come around here, and I'm going to start focusing on these fuel lines that I need to disconnect. So we've got one here, and then the impulse line is back here. And so I'm going to go get a flathead screwdriver and pry this off. I believe this one will pull off a little easier. That one's not too bad, but this one might be stubborn. And it typically, oh, there we go. Okay, it's going to make it. It's going to come off. So I got to get ready to catch my gas when I pull that line off. All right, I got my pan down here, and my strategy is I'm going to lift up on the tank. And when I lift up on it, I want to try to get most of my gas to flow towards the front of the gas tank here, and I want it to sit up in the belly area here because the petcock's in the middle of the tank. So hopefully between the petcock and the fill cap right here, I want all the gas to sit up in there. I don't remember how full this tank is. I don't know how many gallons are in here right now, but we're going to try to get it to sit up in there so that I can pull this line off and keep all the gas up that way while I do the work here on this petcock. All right, look at that. We're not spilling gas. We're doing good. Now we can do the work we need to on this petcock, rebuild it, and put it back on. The key to this next step is cleaning this all off so that when we pop all these screws loose, there's 4 on this side, 2 right here, and 2 right there. When we take those all apart to replace the rubber inside of here, we don't want to put any dirt back in these ports. So, got myself some brass brushes and some plastic bristle brushes and a rag, and I'm going to clean it all up so that we can pull this open and not introduce dirt into this system. As always, when I'm starting to clean up stuff like this, I grab myself some penetrating oil, I spray it around on there because that's the job of this oil, to get rid of this dirt, get in there, clean it all up. Some of you probably got WD-40, some of you probably got Deep Creep, who knows what. But at the end of the day, we probably shouldn't be putting brake cleaner on this, and we probably shouldn't be putting carb cleaner on this because we got paint all around here, and we don't want to mess any of that up. I got this all cleaned up. Now I'm going to crack these screws loose and open everything up so I can replace the rubber in here. I suggest at this point going to get a little cup, a pan, a bowl, something to drop these parts into so we don't lose anything. Like I said before, I had this open before, and I did a poor man's rebuild on it where nothing works in here. The ports are not going to the three different directions. It is just sealed at this cap. So what I'm saying is I know these screws are loose in that I will be able to break them loose with a regular screwdriver. But there have been times when these are so tight that I can't just crack them loose with a normal screwdriver. I need to get myself one of these fancy little impact driver units, and then you hit it with a hammer, gently, of course. So keep that in mind. If yours is crusty and all gummed up, you might have to get something like this. I get nervous about an electric impact driver because there's a lot of torque there and you can't really feel what the screws are doing, and these screws are very little. So I suggest doing it by hand with this type of impact driver if you have trouble getting these screws loose. Now that wasn't too difficult to take this apart, but I want to point out the poor man's rebuild on this if we don't have time to wait for the whole rebuild kit to come in the mail. That's just an O-ring in there, and I got this, you know, at the hardware store, and it's just basically big enough to create a seal. When this system presses in, the seal seals right here and keeps the gas from flowing out of this petcock. Now all the ports are open, so everything is flowing with fuel, but at least we can run the motorcycle or get gas to the carburetor and go for a drive if we need to. Now, as I take my emergency O-ring out of there, I'm also inspecting everything to make sure that it's all nice and clean in there, because we, like I said before, we don't want to introduce any more dirt into the system. Last thing we need is carburetor ports plugged, jets plugged, that sort of thing, once we get this petcock rebuilt. So one thing I noticed was there was a bit of residue down inside of there. That's where this diaphragm with this little O-ring here was rubbing. There's a bit of gunk in there, and you can kind of see some crusty rusty there. So I like to take a rag and a screwdriver, a bigger screwdriver if you have one, and just go ahead and carefully work it in there a little bit and use the rag to get the chamfer on that port nice and clean if you can. You know, and you pull it out and you check it out and you're like, oh yeah, we got some gunk out of there. We got some grease or grime or, I don't know, oxidized gas out of it. Everything's cleaned up real good. I'm ready to rebuild it. What I am not going to do is put this big O-ring in that would be behind these great big screws, because I don't have any gas leaking back there. I had this off earlier when I did diagnose this problem here and figured out I needed a rebuild kit. And this O-ring in there is sealing great. I don't have any problems with that. But if you do have a problem with it leaking back here, or if you mess with it and it gets weird, this is the big one, and it'll sit in the channel inside of there. Even though it looks like an O-ring, it turns into a hot dog. And so that one sits back there. That's the first one we need to worry about. For the next step of the rebuild, you remember this little O-ring I took out? Well, what the factory part looks like is this, which is very specific to this petcock. So there are 4 bumps in there. 2 of them have holes in them that fuel flows through, and 2 of them are simply ridges to align this to. And that presses in here like this. And you got to get it set to the bump. So I use a screwdriver or a little pointy tool or something like that, and it pops right in. And that is going to seal the lever as it turns, to turn it from either reserve, on, or prime. Now that rubber faced gasket is in there, we've got these parts we want to put in. And so remember, we got this little washer that creates tension to push the face of this against that rubber right there. And then we got a new washer here. Now, I'm actually not going to use this washer, and the reason is because it is a little bit smaller in gauge than the stock one, and the stock one is sealing just fine, so I'm not worried about it. But always check this, because I have actually had to send kits back, because if we get a cheap kit from somebody and they run the wrong gauge here, it doesn't come up to the top of this level here and properly seal. I'm not calling out this brand or anything like that, but I can tell from here this is a bigger O-ring than this O-ring, and I don't want to have any leaking happening. Just to reinforce the orientation of this, we got the word fuel at the top, we've got prime on this side, we've got on down here, and we've got reserve right here. So that's how this sits, like that, and it pops in. Everything presses in like that, and then we put our screws in and tighten it in there. Key thing is to make sure you get these screws very tight, but don't do anything to strip out the hex in this. And I should point out that this has the little dot in it, so this is not a standard Phillips screwdriver. This is, I think they call it like GIS or something to that effect. But be careful to get that nice and tight without stripping it. And now we can see if I got this right. We're on right now. That's reserve, and it stops at the little tab up there. Bring it back down to on, bring it to prime, and it stops right there. All right, I'm happy with this part of the petcock rebuild. Sometimes you buy something and you're like, what the heck? Well, they didn't include this gasket in the rebuild, so apparently they assume that gasket never goes bad. This one is okay, it wasn't leaking, but just if you are in need of this gasket, make sure your kit has it, because apparently not all the kits have them. I'm sure some of you crafty people out there could take a piece of gasket material and cut one of these out and make it yourself. This one's going to be just fine for me. Like I said, it wasn't even leaking here, and those screws actually weren't even very tight. I could have had them tighter. So just pay attention to that when you're buying your rebuild kit. One last thing to keep in mind before I screw this piece back onto the bottom of the petcock. The fuel valve, the fuel bung here, needs to go to the back of the tank, not the front of the tank. And you could screw this on this way and have it going to the front of the tank, but the orientation that's correct is towards the back of the tank. So keep that in mind as you fasten it onto the bottom of the fuel shutoff valve. All right, these are nice and tight. Made sure I didn't do anything to strip out the Phillips pattern in these screws, but that gasket now is pressed nicely into this fuel shutoff valve. Now that we move over here, we're replacing this crusty diaphragm, and this cap went on here like this, and of course the port goes back just like the fuel port did, even though this is the diaphragm port that pulsates from the crank of the motor, it still needs to point to the back, okay? Now the way this works is we do need to salvage this piece of plastic that's in the middle. So you push your old crappy diaphragm out, and it comes through the middle, and we're kind of watching as it goes, because we need this port, see that little port right there, needs to face the same way as the O-ring and metal part that pulsates. So let's keep our attention focused on that, and then when I pull it out, I'll flip it over. You can see how this rib is made to match the steel on this side. Alright, so now we got our orientation figured out and we know what we're doing here. So there always seems to be a little grit or grime or soot or oxidization on parts, so take this moment, wipe that all off, get that really nice and clean before we take this new piece here. And it's a little bit tricky, but it's not terrible. Now that that's in there, we just have to line up the holes in this diaphragm material with the little tabs on the face of that plastic. You see that little tab there, and there's a little tab there, and so those are the two tabs, and those two tabs are going to correlate with the two little holes right here. And then, so this will sit like that, and now we got a nice fresh O-ring with a nice clean piece of aluminum here, and the back of the pulsation system here, the diaphragm, all fresh and clean. And I'm going to make sure this surface is really nice and clean before I screw this all together. They do have a little bit of a dummy system going on here, which is great, in that these tabs are at the top. And if I had this backwards, there aren't holes in the same orientation as those. So that does help us not be able to screw up and put this plate on the back on the wrong way. And it will only pop into place if you have it oriented the right way. Once we get this oriented right, and those pins pop in there and everything, before we can put this cap on, we have to put a spring in here. Here's the little brass spring, and it sits right there. That diaphragm wouldn't do anything unless that spring was in there to get that pressure sealed tightly against the inner part of this fuel shutoff valve. So, got this on, the port's going the right way, the spring is in there so that the diaphragm will have the pressure to seal properly down inside of here. And got my big screwdriver here. I'm not going to use my big screwdriver back in there. Got this cute little one here, and it's short enough to fit. See, we don't want to like bang against the inside of the tank here. So this shorter one allows me to tighten this. I'm going to tighten this in a crisscross pattern. So we're going to tighten here, real good, and then there, real good. Now I'll come up here and put that one in nice and tight. Excellent. And that one as well. And then we'll just do a check. Tight. Snug. 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 Alright, this is all back together. All the new parts are in there. All the old parts are in there. Everything's clean. It's ready to go. So now we're going to take it over to the motorcycle over here and hook up the fuel lines and let the gas flow back to those carburetors. I'll make no promises of being smooth or of being clumsy, but right in there you can see those tabs right here, and those tabs have to connect to these rubber parts right here. So we'll kind of line that up. Hope we don't start spilling gas. Watch your cables. We got a choke cable and a clutch cable coming in there. Make sure those cables are not getting pinched when you're putting your tank in. And you work your tank forward like that. Now I'm really happy that we're not leaking at all. And the reason why, even though it's on, that we're not leaking is because that diaphragm is back there. And if that diaphragm is not pumping, we're not pushing gas. But that's also why we have a prime. And the prime means gas just dumps without the pulsation. So keep that in mind. I'm pretty sure prime is always gas running. On is like an off if the pulsation in the diaphragm isn't working. And I believe reserve is in that same port. So we're going to take this pulsation line. I don't think I can get low enough for you to see it, but you'll have to trust that I'm clipping it on. Let's get the gas line out of the way. We'll put the pulsation line on. Press that. That popped into place. Nice. Now we get our fuel line. Alright, get that all the way on nice and tight. And then we set this tank down so that it pops into place back here. There we go. Now this was my makeshift shutoff, gas shutoff valve that I had in there while this was needing to be rebuilt. For today I'm going to leave it. In the long run it might be clean to take that out and run a new line down into the bottom of the carburetor, but it's not a critical fail or a critical success factor to remove that today. So I would say when you're setting up a good fuel system in your bike, check your petcock, make sure you have a fuel filter. Also check the internal of your tank and make sure the internal of your tank is clean, and then work on your carburetor, make sure it's clean. There's also a third thing I should mention, and people don't know this, but your gas cap actually breathes. And if your gas cap is too gunked up, something's going on in there and it's not breathing, this tank can't essentially burp, and the fuel will like vapor lock and not properly flow down to the carburetor. So those are kind of the critical success factors, the recipe to a good running bike. I hope you enjoyed what we did here. I'm just going to put this bolt on, plop my seat back on here, and take this baby for a ride. It's a beautiful fall day here in Minnesota, and we don't get many of these once it gets into November, but hey, it's a great day to go for a ride, so we're going to go do that. Thanks for watching as I fix this for Josh's sake. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a follow, subscribe, give me a comment, tell me how you would have done this differently, or if you have any other ideas, tell me what you're working on. I love to hear your projects. And if you have any questions, or if you have me to have an idea of another video that you want me to shoot about, you know, motorcycles, snowmobiles, things like that, let me know. I'd love to talk with you in the comments. Have a great day. Thanks for watching. Fix It for Josh's sake.